Alright, let's be honest for a second. When people talk about Street Fighter 5, they usually don't start with a lot of praise. It was sort of like the Mortal Kombat 11 of the Street Fighter franchise. They usually start with things like, oh, that game was a mess. And honestly, at launch, they're not really that wrong. But here's the thing nobody really talks about. What if Street Fighter 5 is one of the most misunderstood FGC fighting games ever made? Because depending on when you played it, you experience a completely different game. So today, I just want to sort of break it down to see what went wrong with Street Fighter 6 and what went right, and whether Street Fighter 5 was actually just a big disaster or something just way more complicated. But if you guys don't know me by now, I'm Mr. Frosty Flames, but you can call me Mike. We do anything gaming news, reviews, analysis, playthroughs, etc, etc. I think I'm going to start doing playthroughs again. If you like that style of content and we do it in a chill way with no over editing BS, if you like that stuff, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Frosty Flames Legion. We're closing in on 1700 subs, so I'd love for you to be a part of this journey. We're trying to make it big. We're trying to actually make something happen from this channel, so subscribe and join us in that Frosty Flames journey and join the Legion. Anyways, back to the video. Now let's rewind to 2016 when Street Fighter 5 actually launches, and I remember I was very confused, and many people are confused immediately when the game came out, and it's not because the gameplay was bad, but it was because it felt severely unfinished, sort of like MK1 style stuff. I mean, even worse, man, there was no arcade mode, no real story mode, you had bare bones content, and for a full priced fighting game, this felt more like an early access than a complete product. And this was way before games started getting the norm of, releasing unfinished games and putting it out to fix later. This was one of the first FGC games to actually really do it. And that's where the frustration started, because this wasn't just any game. This was Street Fighter. It's one of the most biggest fighting game franchises ever. And instead of feeling like a major evolution from the beloved Street Fighter 4, it felt rushed, and players noticed everything. The menus felt empty. The single player experience was almost non-existent. Even basic features felt like they were missing. It wasn't just disappointing, it was confusing. Like, how does a game this big launch like this? And this is where things get interesting, because while the content was lacking, the gameplay, this is where people started splitting. The fan base was very split on it. I remember I actually liked it, and some players actually liked it, because Street Fighter 5 simplified a lot of things. There was like execution barriers that were lowered, which made it more accessible to the regular player. Combos were easier, and the game kind of felt a little more aggressive than the previous titles, and it introduced mechanics like V-trigger, which would almost completely shift momentum in a match. And for some players, this was exciting, including myself, because I remember I loved watching Street Fighter 5. I loved watching tournaments because matches were faster, they were more explosive and more accessible. But for others, especially like the core players, the Street Fighter loyalists, it was a huge problem because it felt like the game lost a lot of depth. Veteran players felt like, the neutral was weaker, defense was way worse in the game, and comebacks were way too easy, sort of like how Mortal Kombat is now with fatal blows, right? And suddenly matches were less controlled and more chaotic. It wasn't just different per se, it just felt like the game rewarded the wrong things. So now you have two groups of players. You have players saying, this game is fun and fresh, and you have other players saying, this isn't Street Fighter anymore. And that was the damage of it. And because of that, combined with a rough launch, Street Fighter 5 built a reputation, and a very bad one. Even players who didn't play it heard that it was disappointing. It was kind of like an outlier in the fighting games, because I remember at the time, you had like MKX, which was really good, and then you had Tekken 7, which players said was really good as well. Street Fighter 5 was going down. And because the first impression of Street Fighter 5 was very negative, it coined that reputation of being a bad game. See, that's how strong first impressions are. And once a game gets labeled as bad, it's really hard to shake that. Even as updates started rolling out, even as content improved, more DLC characters came out, they fixed some things, a lot of players had already moved on. And this is where Street Fighter 5's story gets interesting, because unlike many games that fail, this one didn't really stay the same. Because over time, Street Fighter changed a lot. They've added like an arcade mode. They've expanded the roster a lot, improved the visuals, and added more single player content. The game slowly started becoming what people expected at launch. And gameplay wise, it really evolved too, because they had a lot of balance updates that improved the competitive scene, and characters became more refined, strategies became a lot deeper, and slowly people started coming back. Not all at once, but enough to change the conversation. Suddenly you weren't just hearing, this game sucks. You were hearing stuff like, okay, this game isn't actually that bad now. And that's a huge shift. Now let's compare all of that to the launch of Street Fighter 6. And this is where the comparison hits very hard, because Street Fighter 6 launched very well and it felt complete. You had a whole world tour mode that, if you watched my other videos, I praise a lot, because it's like a Mortal Kombat Conquest mode. You've had the Battle Hub, you've had really polished gameplay, and just a lot of content and a lot of DLC content that was well loved by fans. It was everything that Street Fighter V wasn't at launch, and because of that, it made Street Fighter V look even worse in hindsight. Like, why couldn't they do this before? But here's really the twist. Street Fighter 6 also learned from Street Fighter V. The faster gameplay, the accessibility, the focus on player engagement, that just didn't come out of nowhere. That came from the experimentation in Street Fighter V. So while Street Fighter 6 perfected it, Street Fighter V laid the groundwork. And this is on a side note, because I'm an NRS fan. I love Mortal Kombat, I love Injustice. Only if NRS could learn like how Street Fighter did and Capcom, because they could take terrible games and learn what made them bad, take the good stuff out of them, and put them in a new, fresh game and make it blow up and make it really good. But it seems like NRS does not do that. But Street Fighter and Capcom did with Street Fighter 5 to Street Fighter 6. But that's aside the point. I'll make that another video. But right now, let's get to the real question. Was Street Fighter V actually a bad game, or just a badly launched one? Because those are two very different things. It's sort of like how, if you're a Battlefield fan, a lot of Battlefield and a lot of Battlefront games launch really bad but later become very good. Because if you judge it purely on launch, yeah, it was a bad game. It was very rough. You had missing content, frustrating designs, and a lot of broken expectations. But if you look at the full lifespan of the game, like from take it right now, it's not that simple, because by the end, Street Fighter V sort of had a huge roster, like a really big roster. It had solid competitive play, tons of updates, and a dedicated player base. Like, some players even go back to it now and play it. But more importantly, it was still being played, it was still being supported, it was still part of the fighting game conversation. Bad games usually don't last that long unless they become a meme. And the biggest issue with Street Fighter V wasn't just the gameplay, it wasn't the content, it was the timing. It launched too early. And in today's gaming world, that's one of the worst things you could do, because players just don't wait anymore. If your game isn't good at launch, they move on. It's like everybody has the attention span of a goldfish. And if you fix it later, that first impression sticks. They're gonna be like, yeah, well, I played it, a couple months ago. It might be better now, but it wasn't me. It wasn't my game. That's how the mentality is nowadays. So, in my opinion, was Street Fighter V a disaster? I mean, at the start, yeah, totally. There's no doubt in my mind that it was a disaster. There's no way around that. But by the end, it became something much better. It wasn't perfect, it's not a legendary game per se, but definitely not the failure people remember it as. It was a game that just launched too early but refused to stay bad. In a weird way, it kind of walked so Street Fighter 6 could run. And honestly, that might be the most interesting part of its story, because sometimes the games that we like to call failures are the ones that shape the future the most. So if you love Street Fighter 6, just know that Street Fighter 5 died and was hated on and was trashed on for your game to run. But that's just my take on it. Let me know your thoughts down below. Did you guys like Street Fighter V? Do you remember anything about it? I know most of my fan base are Mortal Kombat fans, so I'm wondering if you guys would consider going to Street Fighter V, going to Street Fighter 6, or any other FGC game like Tekken, Guilty Gear, 2XKO, whatever is out there. But anyways, just let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and join the Legion and like this video. Anyways, I thank you all for watching. Mr. Frosty Flames out. Ciao.